Mortal Shell 2 is just around the corner, and so there is no better time to acquaint yourself with the lore of the first game, a story that blends fantasy and the cosmic. Yet I very much underestimated how deep the lore actually goes, as the length of this video will suggest. There is far more going on here than one may expect. The original game laid the foundations for this world by introducing us to some key concepts that will clearly play a role in the second game. Even just playing the beta, we can see that the events of the first game will be important, with its events being directly mentioned as the inciting incident of Mortal Shell 2's story. We already know that there will be returning characters, returning cults, and religions, meaning that it is important to have a solid understanding of the first game before diving into the second. In this video, I will be doing a full catch-up on the first game's lore, so that anyone will be able to pick up and play the second game with full knowledge of what came before. So strap in, grab your favourite shell, and let us dive into the mysterious world of Fulgrim. Let's start by going over the base story of the game, so that people new to the game can get some context as to what we are talking about. Mortal Shell really drops you in the deep end by throwing some cryptic text at you, followed by an equally confusing cutscene. We awake in a realm that is clearly not physical, and we are clearly not human. We are known as the Foundling, though this is a name later given to us by Sester Genessa. For now, our true origin and purpose are obscured to us, and we press on. This astral plane is one we are able to access because of our cosmic nature, and currently we are here via our dreams, though later we will travel here directly. We know this region is called the Reverie, because we can gain the item Glimpse of Reverie as a drop from Hadern when we fight him here in New Game Plus. Its item description very much seems to relate to this realm, a world of overlapping tributaries, a water place meant for self-reflection. Indeed, the very word Reverie is a fitting title, given it is a realm we mainly enter in a dreamlike state. Currently, its purpose is to prepare us. There is a greater will and plan at play here, and we have a role to play. We are armed with a weapon and learn of our innate ability to harden, a state of being in which we temporarily turn to stone, rendering us immune to all damage. It's the defining gameplay feature aside from the shells themselves, and it adds a really unique feel to this game compared to other Souls-likes. We learn the basics of combat while sparring with a mysterious figure called Hadern, a key player in our own story. Yet for now, he is just a spectre that we will train with numerous times within this astral plane. Once our final test is complete, we are deemed ready and finally awake in the mortal realm. We are deep underground, and we must crawl through a long tunnel to the surface. We finally exit above ground, and we see that we have emerged from underneath a giant, deformed skeleton. This skeleton is surrounded by what appear to be statues of worshippers, and this scene is important, as it will turn out this skeleton is likely that of our inhuman mother who birthed us. But again, for now, we are given no explanation. We are in the region known as Fulgrim. One of the first things we discover is the body of a knight, a man called Harros. And it seems as though we are some kind of parasitic creature, able to inhabit the bodies of those who have died. These bodies are the titular mortal shells, the flesh we will be borrowing throughout the course of the game. We don't just wear their flesh. The connection goes deeper than this, as in a way we become them. Our skills and abilities determined by the shell we are wearing, whether it be the high stamina and agility of Teal, or the endurance and power of the hulking Eredrim. Not only that, but we are able to tap into their memories which reveal a fascinating story, showing how invasive our parasitism truly is. These memories tell us a great deal of the lore, because these shells aren't here by happenstance. In fact, they are critical players in the narrative who are directly involved in the events leading up to the game. Teal, the Acolyte; Harros, the Vassal; Eredrim, the Venerable; Solomon, the Scholar; and Hadern, the Deliverer. The stories of these 5 men would largely explain the events of the game. In terms of the player's perspective, the story is unpacked out of order, one piece at a time, as you unlock the memories of each playable shell. But for the sake of this video, I will be weaving it all together into a coherent narrative. If I rely on an item description or a direct quote from an NPC or these memories, then I will quote these on screen. But by and large, if I'm not quoting anything directly, then assume I am paraphrasing the story from these memories. Additionally, another important source of information is our twin sister, an NPC found in the Roguelite DLC, so I will be taking information from her dialogue quite liberally. And yes, we will also explain this character shortly. The land we are in is known as Fulgrim, an overgrown and dilapidated region that seems to be home only to bandits, dangerous creatures, and a single tower. As it so happens, Fulgrim was once a kingdom, something we learn via the Quenching Acid item description, which reads as follows: Fulgrim is a crumbling remnant of a fledgling kingdom. Amongst the ruin, few weapons remain that aren't chipped and rusted. Yet by some miracle, this Quenching Acid restores them. We will later learn that Hadern and his fellows came here and established a growing community, all bonded around the cosmic seedlings he discovered. I imagine that this was the perfect location for such an endeavour, given it probably has some infrastructure still in place from this crumbling kingdom. At its centre lies the tower, our obvious destination as we emerge from our slumber, and here we meet a curious figure, a giant bird-like being who has been chained as a prisoner within the tower's centre. Given we have no context as to what the prisoner has done, the foundling seeks to help this prisoner, breaking one of the seals that bind him. This is no ordinary seal. Some power has been used to hold this being here, suggesting he is something to fear. Whilst he speaks to us in kindness, it is clear there is something very sinister about this being, and he wastes no time in recruiting us to his cause. He remarks that we are different from the others in Fulgrim, a being who has been untainted by false truths. This is likely a reference to the beliefs of the 3 cults that inhabit Fulgrim, organizations that would consider the prisoner a heretic and dangerous. We have not been indoctrinated by the followers of these false gods, and as such we are more likely to work with this chained being. We have not become a believer of these false truths. However, as with most things he says, it has a sinister undercurrent to it. It suggests he knows that we are newborn, naive, and thus easily manipulated to his cause.
Deep within the temples of the devout, you'll find the sacred glands of the revered. Bring the glands back to me, so I can extract the true nectar, just enough to heal me.
And so he tasks us with no small thing. We are to enter the 3 temples of the dangerous cults, and into their inner sanctums. There we are to kill the revered, cosmic abominations that are worshipped as gods, and take their sacred glands from them. The Revered, ourselves, and our twin sister are all cosmic beings, inhuman things born from seeds that fell from the sky. The umbrella term for all of these beings is the Unborn. Each of the Unborn has a sacred gland, the source of their transformative powers. From these organs, something called true nectar can be distilled, a powerful substance that the prisoner claims will help restore his strength. He comments on how these devout squander the gifts of the Revered. He believes it is silly to worship these beings and tend to them, when the more pragmatic approach would be to slaughter them for their nectar.
The devout squander these gifts, letting them rot. They dwell in the Revered's temples, but waste what remains of their precious offerings.
Nectar is the source of the main currency we find in the game, tar. Tar is essentially the impure runoff from distilled nectar. For example, the item description for extracted tar reads as follows: tar extracted with some skill from old nectar. Even decaying nectar can still hold a fraction of the Revered's blessings. Highly sought, such tar remains useful, though it tends to react dangerously. And we get further elaboration from the congealed tar item descriptions, which reads as follows: old nectar, oily and congealed. When nectar is improperly purified, a thick tar is produced. This viscous dreck is useless for rites and rituals, though the desperate will consume anything that resembles salvation. So tar is imperfect nectar, congealed, runoff, or improperly distilled. It does have power, as we use tar to access the memories of our shells, but it is far from true nectar, which has reality-altering properties. But we will discuss that in more detail in the following chapters. It seems as though the Revered secrete nectar, and it is essentially disseminated down the ranks of the devout in varying degrees of quality. The lower ranks get the poorest quality dregs, but the prisoner wants us nectar at its purest, and so we must take it at its very source by harvesting the secretion glands of each of the three Revered of Fulgrim. And so we enter the Temple of Ash, the Tomb of Martyrs, and the Seat of Infinity, three distinct cults that each worship a Revered each having its own doctrine of worship and belief. We will get into these cults in detail later in the video, but for now, let us focus on the overall main story. Once we have claimed all three of these divine glands, we give them to the prisoner, who claims it is time for his ascension, and we are to bear witness to it. He then disappears, and if we follow him down the hole beneath his prison, then we re-emerge in the same astral plane we started the game in. It appears as if this being, the Dark Father, the Unchained, is something closer to the Unborn than human, his physical appearance actually being very similar to our twin sister, who is herself an Unborn. And presumably his own cosmic nature is how he is able to access this plane of existence. However, this isn't enough for him, as he was apparently under the impression that if he consumed such a large quantity of nectar, he would truly ascend to something like godhood.
The visions weren't for me. They were for you. Are you not meant for this blighted place after all? But why should you get to escape, while the rest of us remain mired in this miserable pit? It's senseless, this injustice. If I can't ascend, neither will you.
Instead, he realizes that this future was never meant for him, that instead it was meant for us. Bitter over this truth, he declares that if he will not ascend, then neither shall we, and we do battle one last time upon the Grey Lake. Despite his power, he is a somewhat pathetic being, a cosmic bird with useless wings and a deformed lower body, and so he is no match for the combat-hardened foundling. Having slain the Glandfather, we take his gland this time, into which the power of all three Revered has been distilled. Indeed, as he predicted, we are able to ascend, and the game ends as we rise up into the cosmos. These are the events that are referenced in the introductory cinematic to Mortal Shell 2, the Foundlings' victory over the Unchained, and their following ascension. Yet this is just the surface level narrative, as the game has a much deeper lore that does a good job at explaining some of its greater mysteries. And I think the most logical point to start would be with the cosmic beings of this universe, so let us explain the Foundling and their unborn kin. After hearing the story overview, it should be clear that in this game's universe, there are a number of cosmic beings who are at the centre of the story. The Unborn seems to be an umbrella term that covers all of the cosmic creatures. 3 of these would become the Revered of each of the cults. So where do these beings come from? Well, our twin sister tells us directly. Having once been told by Solomon where they came from, she says the following. He said, "Our kin fell from the heavens, in golden chariots, trailed by fire and lightning. And in their smouldering ruin, Hadern found the first seeds of infinity. He knew not what they were, only that they were to be revered." Of course, he changed his mind eventually. Hadern is one of the central figures in the events of the game, and his shell memories back up this version of events. In one of these, he says the following. "I found the seedlings wriggling in the earth. In my palm they writhed helplessly, their hide mottled and dried like dead leaves before falling away. These creatures grew soft and flesh-like, wrinkled like my own hands. They blossomed into something strange, yet familiar. In the Virtuous Cycle DLC, we are tasked by our sister with tracking down the seeds that Hadern later destroyed and discarded, and so by getting our hands on them we can get a glimpse of what these seeds would have looked like. Having now played the beta for Mortal Shell 2, the idea of seeds and things falling from the sky should make it clear that the Undermether, her Ova and the Harbinger are all kin to the Unborn from the first game. Hadern immediately recognised that these beings were special, though their appearance caused terror among his fellows. He believed that they had been sent for a greater purpose. When we meet our twin sister, she tells us that Hadern was the one who built the runic gates, devices meant to reward the devout. From a gameplay perspective, these gates are essentially the way in which we purchase our meta upgrades for the roguelite DLC, the Virtuous Cycle, but from a lore perspective, Hadern built these as holy objects, meant to be interacted with by the devout, so they could be rewarded for their piety. This suggests that Hadern was a leader of the devout. Given he is someone who rewarded the devout, the logical inference is that he was a founding leader of a new religious movement, a congregation that was built around the worship of these seedlings. He is the first leader of the devout. Of course, in time this movement would outgrow him and fracture into different cults, but it started with Hadern. Given the religious language he uses regarding the seedlings, it is clear that Hadern was a believer and sought to protect these seeds so that their divine purpose might be ascertained. His title of the Deliverer suggests that he was some kind of religious figure, seen as the one who delivered the divine to the people. The idea that he was some kind of messiah at one point is reinforced by one of the many etchings that we find, as it reads as follows. Their messiah planted his seeds and left. They seek a utopia which cannot exist, charmed and forgotten, choking on the nectar of false gods. How high and mighty will they be when they consume this poison? This is clearly a reference to Hadern, the Messiah, who first found the seedlings and then brought the fledgling gods to the devout. Yet he would eventually abandon the movement he started, and the Unborn with him. Of course, Hadern couldn't shepherd these beings alone. He would need allies, and it seems as though he once had many to help him. It appears as though his main partner was Solomon, the scholar's shell we can inhabit, and his effigy tells us that he was a scholar of great renown. He took a great interest in the seedlings which Hadern had discovered, and thus took action to study and protect these seedlings. According to our sister, it was Solomon who constructed the Fulgrim Tower, a sanctuary for this burgeoning movement and their unborn charges. The tower is, of course, later repurposed as a prison for the Dark Father, and becomes our base of operation during the course of the game. The twin sister also tells us that the bandits that now inhabit Fulgrim and surround the tower were once Solomon's men, that Solomon armed and armoured them. So what we see in Fulgrim are the fallen remnants of a tower and army that were meant to keep the seedlings safe. In time, these creatures would grow and take on horrific forms, to the point that they would disturb even the faithful Hadern. He says the following in one of his memories: "They kept growing these seedlings. These larvae, there is no name for such aberrations. I caged them, but these cruel bars only encouraged them to grow hard, cavernous. They broke through their bonds. From their nebulous forms, limbs, even faces emerged, their eyes pleading. The idea that these unborn are horrific to look at lines up with what we see of them within their temple. Mounds of twisted flesh, an eldritch horror to be sure, and yet still quite childlike. Even after escaping, they do not attack Hadern. They instead look to him with pleading eyes. This touches upon one of the key details of the Unborn, including the Foundling and our sister. These beings are powerful, but, like children, vulnerable in their naked form. They are parasites in that they take everything from the world around them in order to grow, adapt, and change. This same excerpt highlights how these formless eldritch beings began to adopt human features like arms and hands, explaining how, in time, they began to develop human-like features, despite them not being human. The Unborn are influenced by the world around them, their identity molded by the humans they come into contact with. We do this in a literal way by taking the form of our shells, but it also happens to the Unborn who will become revered. They are hardened by Hadern's treatment of them. As we will discuss shortly, Hadern also notes how these revered take on unique forms based on the behaviours of their cult followers. This important information comes from another of Hadern's memories, which reads as follows: "Even the revered reflect their madness, their hate. They are lost. Each of the revered is unique, because they reflect the madness of the specific cults that surround them. The reason the Unborn are so malleable is because of the product they produce, the product that their followers and the prisoner himself are so desperate to get their hands on, the pure nectar. As we mentioned earlier, nectar and the less pure tar are products secreted by the Unborn, a fluid that is produced by a specific organ, their glands. This fluid, especially in its purest form, is a medium for transformation, and this extends to the Unborn themselves. This is something that Solomon was acutely aware of, and he told the twin sister of his understanding of the sacred gland. She says, "Solomon said there's something in us that initiates our metamorphosis. That something being the sacred gland. And I find it interesting that the nectar may be a sort of hormone that was never meant to leave the body of the Unborn. Rather, its biological purpose was purely meant to be an internal process that transformed the Unborn as they grew. No wonder the prisoner wants his hands on these organs, so that he might tap into these powers in their purest form. Indeed, as we will learn, the prisoner has already taken nectar, in an attempt to become a god himself, and this is why he has the physical form he has. The nectar became a product that was distilled from the Revered in Fulgrim, and began to be consumed in varying degrees of purity. It is the presence of nectar that has transformed Fulgrim itself, warping reality, and likely is what gives rise to such spatial anomalies as we see within the Seat of Infinity. We know that the purest nectar can warp reality because of what happens when we ourselves drink nectar at the altars of the Revered. Upon consuming such a pure distillation, we actually enter a separate plane entirely, the true domain of the Revered and their guardians. For example, in the Crypt of the Martyrs, we consume the divine nectar, and then awake in a dark, icy abyss, where we end up fighting Tarsus, the first martyr. What is interesting about this is that in the physical world, Tarsus is long dead, being the first martyr of this cult who was killed and then enshrined in the eyes. But after drinking the pure nectar, we are somehow able to come face to face with Tarsus. We are now beyond the eyes, a pocket dimension created by and maintained by the Unborn, known as the Immaculate, and clearly is a product created via the transformative power of her nectar. Fulgrim is in the state it's in because of the widespread consumption of nectar's impure runoff, tar, which clearly doesn't have the level of transformative ability of the nectar, but instead is consumed in large quantities as a sort of drug. As an aside, I have seen a prevailing theory that all of the Revered were once people who have been twisted by nectar, thus becoming an unborn artificially. And while there are instances of people transforming and becoming akin to an unborn, I think it is clear from the dialogue found in the DLC that the Revered are 3 of these seedlings, raised by Hadern. The Revered were never human. They have just adopted certain human features because of the influences exerted upon them. As of now, we don't know where the seedlings came from and their purpose, but there are some interesting connections that we can make regardless. We get some clues that the foundling and the twin sister are related to a figure called Vatra, who is revered by some as a god. There is only one item that directly mentions this god, but it nonetheless tells us a great deal: the molten spike. Its item description reads as follows: this molten spike fits perfectly inside the hallowed sword. In an age long past, the servants of Vatra used these spikes in stonebirth rituals. The goddess's ill-bred offspring could not hatch without their aid, so Vatra's offspring are ill-bred, and apparently couldn't give birth without outside assistance. With that in mind, our sister says the following of our birth: "Do you remember Mother? I don't. I remember thrashing, choking on mud, the needle-like blade, and that knight who wielded it. He carved us from Mother's womb. What possessed him to stop, who can say? But he dragged me out, then you, and brought us to Hadern, and left Mother to die. I do hope something terrible happened to that knight." This knight is heavily implied to be Harros, as he is the only one who really fits this description. So it is clear that the foundling's birth is of the type that is described by the molten spike, suggesting that both ourselves and our twin sister are related to Vatra somehow. Everything else about Vatra is up to our own interpretation for now, as she is not directly referred to again beyond this. But we can trace a couple of clear connections between her and the foundling. The clearest of these is to stone. We already know that the birthing ritual associated with the Unborn is known as stone birth, and that her offspring often have a connection to stone. We ourselves have the ability to harden, to turn to stone on command, and our twin sister has an even stronger connection to stone. She says that she is able to swim through stone as easily as we travel through air, suggesting that she is able to travel through any rock. She says that this is their inheritance, powers handed down by their mother, whatever the true source of those powers turns out to be. Indeed, the fact that Vatra is connected to the Harden ability and to Stone has been confirmed by Mortal Shell 2's beta, as the second seal we get our hands on is Vatra's seal, and it grants us the ability to harden. With that in mind, Hadern's ability to harden while we spar with him should be of great interest to us. Now, admittedly, we only see him use it in the Reverie, the astral plane, and it is very likely he cannot use this power in the real world. Yet the fact he is able to harness this at all suggests that he himself has a connection to Vatra as well. Indeed, there is another memory of Hadern that suggests he spoke on behalf of Vatra, believing himself to be a servant of hers. The memory in question reads as follows: I found the priest in a squalid temple. I explained that her goddess had sent me. This goddess Hadern refers to is likely Vatra, given she is the only being called a god in the first Mortal Shell. So Hadern was most likely a follower of hers, and likely was even before he found the seedlings. He immediately believes that the seedlings are divine gifts, and he seems to be very pious in nature. For example, one of his memories reads as follows: Surely such creatures have been sent to us for some greater purpose. Yet I see terror in the eyes of my kin. They do not understand this blessed harmony. He believes the beings are sent to them by his god for a greater purpose. I don't want to speculate much more on Vatra's true nature here, as the second game is just around the corner, and I think a lot of the questions we have about her will be answered soon. For now, just know that she's tied to the Unborn through the stone birth ritual, and to the hardening ability. Beyond that, I'd rather wait and see than guess. So let us summarise what we know of the Unborn story so far. They fell from the sky as seedlings, where they were found by Hadern. He and his associate Solomon would then raise and look after them in Fallgrim, and the tower here was built for that purpose. A burgeoning religious movement would begin to develop around these beings, with Hadern as the initial leader. However, as we mentioned, Hadern began to fear the Unborn he had raised, and would start to take steps to curtail them. As an aside, when I reference the 3 revered Unborn throughout the chapter, I will be referring to them by their individual monikers, which I believe can be taken from different inscriptions. I will refer to the Unborn of the Temple of Ash as the Immolation. I will refer to the Unborn of the Crypt of Martyrs to be the Immaculate. And finally, the Unborn of the Seat of the Infinity, I will call the Myriad. These are 3 of the seedlings raised by Hadern, who would grow large and take on unique forms. He caged them, but their prison was insufficient in holding them back, and so he looked elsewhere to get help. It seems as though Hadern tried to deal with each of the 3 Unborn individually, separating them and having someone help construct a prison for them that matched the Unborn's powers and influence. Before the Temple of Ash was a religious site, it was a forge, where metallurgists were enslaved and forced to labour. The forge master of this place was Imrod, once a smith, and someone whose expertise was sought by Hadern. We know that Imrod is the forge master he speaks of, because we also know Imrod was a smith who forged Hadern's Axatana. The relevant memory of Hadern meeting with Imrod reads the following: The forge master listens with rapt attention. He knows too, this seedling can't be contained by our crude implements. We are in agreement. I will bring him iron, and he will construct a fearsome cage, a maze that grows more perilous with each new addition. I hope that keeps my hateful kin at bay. So this is how the forge would be converted into a sort of labyrinth, with the temple grounds fast travel description telling us that it was carved into the earth, fitted with steel and meant to keep people out. This memory also mentions Hadern's hateful kin, and these are no doubt those of his followers who had begun to worship the Unborn, which I believe took the name the Immolation. This Unborn is described in the following way by an inscription. The hungriest of the unborn burns with desire. He demands sacrifice, but his hunger, it ne'er ends. As we noted earlier, the unborn take the form of those who worship them, and thus the Revered of Ash had turned into a hateful, hungry being, and the hateful kin Hadern refers to are likely those who have started to worship it. A cult of hateful people, those that would eventually form the Cult of Ash. This labyrinth, of course, would eventually become the Temple of Ash, and the Forge Master Imrod would eventually become the foremost of the Immolation's devout. We see a similar story when we look at how the other two Revered Unborn would be dealt with by Hadern. To help deal with the myriad, he sought out an architect, and another of Hadern's memories document this exchange. With my knife at his throat, the architect grew quiet as he beheld my companion, this endless, formless mass. I pushed him forward and demanded he touch it. With a trembling hand, he reached out. His fingertips grazed its glistening skin and he fell to his knees, transfixed. I knew he saw as I saw what was required, the inscrutable geometry. I believe this architect to be Crucix, later known as the Twiceborn, and it seems as though upon touching this myriad unborn, he was shown a vision by it. Concepts beyond the normal rules of reality, a construct of impossible geometry. Clearly, the foundational idea behind what would become the Seat of Infinity. Hadern likely believed that this being needed to be confined in a structure that reflected the complexity of its mind, with no mere conventional structure able to hold it. Finally, it seems as though he struck a deal with a priestess of Vatra to help construct an underground warren in order to contain the Revered, known as the Immaculate. This is a memory we have looked at in part already, so I won't read it in full, but it seems as though after convincing this priestess of his association with Vatra, and that the Immaculate was also of her goddess, they made an agreement, an accord. She would burrow underground and await deliverance. In other words, she would build the underground complex that would become known as the Crypt of Martyrs, and shelter the Immaculate, awaiting ascension. I believe that this priestess of Vatra would eventually become the Ovate, the leader of the Martyrs cult. And so Hadern took action to contain the rapidly growing Unborn and their followers. And yet, in so doing, he had helped lay the foundation of the three Revered cults. Hadern eventually lost control of the devout as these three cults grew in power, and their practices began to involve the extraction and consumption of tar. He returned to the architect's new building and was taken aback by how impressive this new temple was. The architect himself was much transformed, dressed now in robes, and presenting himself as a religious leader, who liberally consumed the nectar of his unborn. Hadern's loss of power is well illustrated by this exchange, as he is essentially barred from confronting Crucix by his new followers. As an aside, I believe this memory is our indication that Crucix was the architect, as Crucix is the leader of the Seat of Infinity, and here the architect is shown in the same role. Hadern was very much against the consumption of nectar and tar, seeing this product as something divine that was not meant for humankind, once again highlighting his pious nature. He was right to feel this way, as the consumption of this product led to hideous transformations, and even as tar, it led to people losing themselves, spending their lives consuming it and needing it, as it is like a drug dependence. Solomon, Hadern's partner, was a man of learning and seemed less concerned with notions of piety and heresy. He only cared about knowledge. As a result, it seems as though Solomon wasn't as despairing about these new developments, and actually joined the Brethers and Sesters of the Seat of Infinity. In a dialogue, our twin sister tells us that he studied under Crucix, thus directly naming him as a member of this temple. Additionally, a number of his memories seem to reference the beliefs surrounding time and causality that is espoused by the Temple of Infinity, as well as a couple of references to the shifting archives and their tablets. We will talk about the beliefs of the three cults soon, including the Seat of Infinity, but for now all that is relevant is to understand that Solomon and Hadern's divide is because they are two very different men. Hadern is a man of faith, who is perturbed by what he sees as heresy, and careless consumption of that which isn't humanity. Solomon is a scholar, a man of knowledge, who is more interested in results and learning. Thus, the growth of the Revered and their cults was an opportunity for him. Hadern seemingly remained here. However, it's clear his holy mission was falling apart, with many of his devout either joining the cults or becoming bandits. And Fulgrim's false gods would draw others to this land for varying reasons, which is where Teal, Eredrim, and Harros enter the picture. So at this juncture, I do think we need to discuss the three cults, as a number of the Mortal Shell characters are very much connected to them. Additionally, I believe that these cults will still be important to some degree in the second game, as we can already see some references to them and some recurring enemies who are linked to these three religions from the first game. To clarify the structure of these organizations, each temple has a Revered at its heart, an unborn creature that now reflects the beliefs of its followers. The three bosses we fight in each area are not the Revered. The fleshy abominations that we rip the glands from after these fights are the Revered. The bosses we fight are basically their guardians, usually high-ranking members of each of the cults who act as the final barrier to the vulnerable Revered. I want to start with the Seat of Infinity, the temple dedicated to the myriad Revered, as it is probably the most lore significant out of the three. Its very aesthetic design tells you that this is a place concerned with the mysteries of reality. We can learn a little of their structure via a certain inscription, which reads as follows. The reward for loyalty is servitude. Thus the Twiceborn requires no pledges. They came here searching for answers, like you do now, but you will find nothing but silence and fury. Throw yourself into the chasm. Let the void take you and remake you. You will be reborn, a child of the myriad, a Sester or Breather. They require no pledges because they don't see themselves as a religion. They are above such superstition. They are all equal seekers of truths, inquisitive souls bound in brother and sisterhood. The Twiceborn is, of course, a reference to Crucix, the boss of this area, and seemingly the leader of this cult. As I mentioned earlier, I believe that he was once the architect charged by Hadern to build this temple. He is also likely the person portrayed in the giant statue in the dim gate, though that clearly was before he underwent his dramatic transformation. But to understand what it is to be Twiceborn, we need to understand their specific beliefs. As should be evident by the very impossible physical form of the temple, this movement is primarily concerned with peering into the fabric of reality. Their complex beliefs are hard to surmise, but I will do my best. In short, they do not believe in the self or in the individual. Instead, they believe that we are all a boundless connected multitude. This is represented by the sacred gland of the myriad, Revered itself, which reads as follows. A cancerous mass of gnarled tissues. This gland thumps with an irregular cadence, as if two hearts are intertwined in this tangled clump. The longer it's held, the more clear it becomes that a multitude is contained within one's own flesh. It claims that within one's flesh, within one's physical form, there is a multitude that are all intertwined. This is why its very gland has taken on a knotted, cancerous form. This idea is perhaps more directly explained by a certain inscription, which reads as follows: "We no longer remember our name. We are a multitude, emptied and repoured into a human-like vessel, a comforting mirage. Your eyes refuse to acknowledge our boundless form, but neither time or shape can confine us. So everyone is one. It's just that the multitude is divided and filled into mortal, human-like forms. There is no individual. We are all one intertwined being." Seeing the world this way also explains why the seat of infinity's inner space is filled with impossibilities, constructions that shouldn't exist, that defy what we understand to be the normal rules of gravity. And I believe reality has broken down here because of the warping powers of Nectar, reforming space to reflect the internal beliefs of this cult. If we are all one, and all matter is an intertwined multitude, then why does it need to be constrained by what we consider to be normal? Floating blocks should not fall because they are not separate pieces. They are just an individual part of a connected whole. Thus, the form it takes hardly matters. The power of the Unborn's nectar has made these ideas manifest, physically warping the space found within the temple. This is why the Sesters and Breathers take on masks, so that they become faceless. Their individual persona is erased. This is told to us via the untarnished mask, which reads as follows: "A Sester's mask of seamless white stone. To be ordained, a Sester must give up her name, even her face. Donning the mask encourages a new sort of kinship, a connection to a greater spirit and to all Sesters." This is of course the same mask worn by Sester Genessa, confirming that she was once a member of the Seat of Infinity. Indeed, she confirms as such during her dialogue at Eternal Narthex.
"Once I was in awe of the knowledge contained here, but it was a fool's errand to try to catalog the contents of this library."
It is here that she will cross paths with Teal, before they both leave their respective cults behind and become lovers in the wilds of Fulgrim. But we will discuss that in detail when we soon discuss Teal. But this is why all the Breathers and Sesters of the Temple have their faces covered, from the Sublime Sesters to the Faceless Clerics. It is to mask their individuality and encourage them to all feel as one. I would also suggest that this is where Solomon first obtained his face mask, as we know that he too once studied here for a time. When one gives up your name and yourself, then the next step is that which was described by the first inscription, jumping into the chasm of the temple and having yourself remade. This is the process that an NPC, Breather Corvid, is trying to pluck up the courage to do. He stands on the precipice of the chasm, but is too scared to join his Breathers. This is referred to as the Rite of Rebirth, and our sister also refers to it as the Twice-Born ritual. Clearly this is the same rite that Crucix undertook, likely the first to do so, and he was reborn, with both fates entwined in a single body. Again, this harkens back to the lore found in the Knotted Gland, wherein it claims that multitudes exist within one body. This rebirth apparently separates these multitudes so that you are twice born. Two possible fates of you are reborn. In Crucix's case, his fates were reborn but in a single vessel, distinct beings, just physically conjoined. Our twin sister was surprised when she learned that Solomon himself confessed that he was twice born, because he was no madman, no monster. And perhaps there is a reason for that. Perhaps it is because Solomon was twice born, that he had no madness within him. Because the version that she met was someone who had the madman aspect of him sifted out. Perhaps Solomon was separated into two halves. One is the kind and intelligent man she knew, and his other half could have been a sort of mad scientist character. someone who pursued knowledge for his own ends and ascension. To not beat around the bush, I believe that Solomon's brother, the prisoner who is the villain of the game, is in fact Solomon's other half, the dark aspect of him that came into existence when he was twice born. The idea that brothers and sisters all give birth to a dark side is indeed suggested by Sester Genessa, who says the following:
I speak not only of my brothers and sisters, but of their twins. Just as every flame casts a shadow, so too does the spirit. And here they manifest. Reflections, birthed from a broken mirror, a shattered place.
Perhaps the aggressive warrior-like Sesters we meet in the temple are these shadows, the violent counterpart to the scholar half. The Sesters who wore masks in the style of Genessa could have been the inquisitive half, and the warrior-like versions are their violent impulses that were filtered out. I will point out further evidence regarding my Solomon brother theory in a later chapter that is solely dedicated to the Dark Father. For now, I just want that possibility to percolate while we focus on the Seat of Infinity itself. But Solomon is also a good source for giving us an insight into what someone experiences as they are being unmade and remade by the twice-born ritual. In one of his memories, he seems to be able to perceive time differently, as if he can see the past and the future all at once. He watches his brother, in the future, drink nectar that would lead to his horrifying transformation, even though it hasn't happened yet. In essence, you experience the world as this cult believes it to be, an interwoven string that stretches across all reality. Thus you can see all of your life, past and present, all at once. Having undergone the twice-born ritual, and becoming a child of the myriad, the Sesters and Brothers of the Temple would dedicate their time to unraveling the mysteries of the universe. This is the purpose of the Shifting Archives, a library stacked to the ceiling with tablets carved with knowledge and philosophical musings. We can learn a little about this process via the hammer and chisel, one of the 5 weapons we have access to, that apparently was once meant to inscribe these tablets. It reads as follows: the only tool fit to write of eternity. Though innocuous in appearance, it is only by these tools that the twice-born etched histories and scripture upon the sacred tablets. Beneath the hammer's blow, reality itself bends and breaks. When reading some of the tablets found in the archives, the contents range from fascinating philosophy to the ramblings of mad men. This is likely due to how the members of this temple seemingly come across knowledge. The Sesters' bindings tell us that they occlude their sight so that they do not go mad by staring directly into infinity. My presumption is that by undergoing their transformation and seeing some of the mind-altering things that Solomon described, one gets a new understanding of reality and thus transcribes these learnings onto a tablet, adding to this repository of knowledge. Overall, a fascinating site of worship, with very distinct if hard to understand beliefs, but the role in which they play in Solomon's, Genessa's and the Dark Father's story is why I believe the story of this cult to be so important. We will discuss these characters more throughout the video, but for now I want to move on to the second of our cults. The Temple of Ash, a labyrinthian place built attached to a forge, began a religion that saw flesh as a weakness. Sester Genessa tells us a little bit about their beliefs and practices as we travel through the temple, that these cultists see the body as something fraught with impurities.
The body is a tainted vessel fraught with impurities. I do not miss it.
Imrod, the old forge master, is now the leader of this cult, and the protector of the immolation. We learn from an inscription that he was the first of this cult, and his beliefs likely were the result of some illness he suffered. It reads as follows: stricken with all the ills that consumed his kin, Imrod, last of the indecipherable, dragged himself before the immolation. He witnessed, as you will one day, the consecrated, living flame, always becoming, always feeding, as its form flakes away in torrents of ash. So Imrod apparently suffered from some illness that afflicted him and all his kin. Is this some bodily ailment due to the nature of his work? Some lung-related malady because of working with fire, metals, and vapours all day? Either way, he felt like his body had failed him, and knelt before the immolation unborn that he had built the labyrinth for. In so doing, he found the answer to his ills, a purifying flame that will burn away the frail physical form that ultimately fails us. I feel their beliefs are best described by the item description of Disciples' Rag, which reads as follows. The Disciples of Ash often appear like lepers, covered in rags, but they bear no shame. Beneath their bandages, scarred litanies profess that mortality is a toilsome obligation, only eased by the embrace of agony. Flesh and mortality are burdens, ones that can only be eased via pain and immolation. An inscription within the temple further emphasizes these beliefs as it reads, "The body is little more than kindling that our spirits burn through, no more coddling the infirm, no more sheltering the weak. Purify the flesh, leave nothing but ashes." Sester Genessa claims that nothing but ash lies beneath their hoods and helmets, as if the most devout of their order have completely burned away their physical forms. Other implements of torture are found here, including Iron Maidens, that illustrate the fact that this cult is one based on flagellation, self-mutilation, and ultimately the destruction of one's own flesh. This type of cult arising in a forge isn't surprising, given the fires and forges here would be suitable implements for such religious practices. Indeed, this is a fact highlighted by the fast travel description for the Sanctum of Flame, which reads, "Once a foundry, where the metallurgists, clasped in iron, toiled beneath their taskmasters. Their instruments remain, repurposed for the disciples who gather beneath the immolation. They await the liturgy of ash." As we looked at earlier, the immolation Revered demands sacrifice and has a hunger that never ends. The sacrifice it asks of its followers is their own flesh. Again, these beliefs and demands of the Unborn are essentially parasitic. The immolation wasn't born a hungry fire god, yet it has become that because of its followers, and the fiery forge environment it finds itself in. Imrod has now become the protector of the immolation, its high priest, who delivers its gifts to the faithful, immolating the flesh of the lucky few. Teal, one of the Shell's and fan favourites who will be returning in the sequel, was an acolyte here, and he seems to have been drawn here for the same reasons that Imrod started the cult. He was suffering from an illness, apparently only given 2 years to live, and apparently he was directed to the Temple of Ash by a merchant, likely Vlaz, given he is described as hideous but kind. Coming here, he witnesses the practices of the Oblate and their followers, the burning and mutilation of the flesh, and while he initially submitted himself to their rituals, it is clear he began to despair at what he witnessed at the temple. One of his memories reads as follows: "As smoke choked my vision and tears welled in my eyes, the world itself burned white hot, but beneath it all there was nothing, no monsters, no gods, only oblivion. The consecrated fires revealed cinders and shadows, yet I strained to see more. Surely these sages offered more than the assurances of annihilation. So Teal realized that the Temple of Ash didn't offer salvation. It offered a way to escape the frailties of the flesh by obliterating it entirely. And so he left, delirious from the pain of the immolation rituals. He stumbled his way to one of the other temples, the Seat of Infinity. I want to give Genessa her own subtitle here, mainly because she is such an important character, and one that needs a fair bit of analysis to understand fully. Returning to Teal, we know he fled the Temple of Ash and ended up at the Seat of Infinity, stumbling here in his delirium. Here he finds kindness at the hands of one of the Sesters, as his memory reads as follows. I was delirious when I reached the Seat of Infinity. Did I dream up this kind soul among the cherubs and the faceless masters? She welcomed me without flinching and offered nourishment. Had my throat always been this parched? This Sester is likely Sester Genessa. Sester and Breather are the titles given to the acolytes of the Seat of Infinity. But Genessa is special. She is essentially a formless being now, one who has transcended flesh, and it is why she is able to exist in multiple locations all at once. This is not ordinary for Sesters of the Temple, as we can see that all her other Sesters are very much made of flesh and blood. However, at the time he met her, she would have been flesh and blood, and she tells us that she once used to be a very pious acolyte, someone who was in awe of the knowledge found in the shifting archives. But it seems she, like Teal, eventually became disillusioned with her purpose at her temple. It seems as though after this initial meeting, they left the Seat of Infinity together, and it appears as though the two fell into a life of hedonism with the bandits of Fulgrim, drinking tar for pleasure and becoming lovers. Genessa recognizes Teal's shell when we first take it, calling him her beloved.
You wear a familiar face, or should I say, a distinct lack thereof. Where did you find him, foundling? Do not answer. Just come closer. It's a simple pleasure to glimpse my beloved, even if he's truly gone.
As an aside, this is also reaffirmed in the Mortal Shell 2 beta, where once again Genessa acknowledges Teal as her lover, and regrets that she didn't do more for him. Indeed, as we will learn, Genessa will eventually leave Teal behind as she becomes an immortal. His memory speaks of this heady time, when the two fell in with bandits and became lovers. Within the wilds we forgot our teachings, and fell in with brigands. They mixed droplets of tar with muddy spirits, and made no promises of salvation. We drank heartily, stumbling from one camp to the next. We rutted like joyous animals in the filth. I find it interesting here that he says they forgot their teachings, as if his partner was also a religious person, which Genessa was, and they both apparently gave up their lives of asceticism in order to pursue more earthly pleasures. Indeed, when we speak to Genessa in the Temple of Ash, she speaks of only missing one thing now, that she doesn't have a physical body, the pleasures of the flesh, a very humanizing moment for an otherwise inhuman being. Their taste for tar led them to steal more of it, and the critical memory detailing this event reads as follows. We stole from those thieves. There was never enough tar to go around. It was wasted on them anyways. We knew what it was, its full potential. Why dilute it? But we were punished all the same. In time, my ruined face peeled away. Her form faded into something like fog, something trapped between realms. They likely stole this tar from bandits, as if you speak to Baghead with Teal's shell. He recognizes him, saying that he has a lot of nerve, and that he has no tar to steal, implying he is aware that Teal stole from him. Teal's face, already ruined by disease and ritual, began to peel away, but Genessa became something else entirely, a disembodied being that existed between our world and the astral plane. The old prisoner comments on Genessa's state of being, as apparently he is privy to the nature of her apotheosis. He says,
I'm certain you've seen the phantom that wanders these stairs. I once knew her. She studied beneath the obsidian arches, a Sester like any other, serving the Revered, pining for a taste of immortality. Well, she found what she wanted. Shattered and reconfigured, reborn, if you'd like. But with one foot in the next world. She is cursed to observe eternally. Powerless without an instrument. A vessel for her to pour her will into.
So a lot of really interesting information here. Firstly, he reaffirms that she originally studied at the Obsidian Temple, but that she pined for immortality, and upon ingesting enough tar, she succeeded and was, to quote him, shattered and remade, with one foot in this world and one in the other. He is talking about the spirit world and the mortal, and how she is able to straddle between the two. Genessa herself comments on the nature of spirits, on how she is able to cross the threshold at will. If we die, it is Genessa who keeps our mortal flesh safe and guides our spirit back to it. It is this power of hers that allows us to keep coming back and travel through the astral from one location to another. That is fast travel. The ornate mask, a replica of Genessa's mask that allows us to travel between her different locations, goes some way to explaining her state of being. It reads as follows: a perverse and gaudy replica of a Sester's mask. When this mask is worn, the spirit feels nebulous, boundless even. The vast distances between each being dissolves, revealing a vision of the world beheld by 1,000-fold eyes. She is a nebulous being, unbound by the permanency of flesh, able to seamlessly move between her various vessels that are located all throughout Fulgrim. Indeed, this aspect of her new existence is perceived by Teal himself when he is high off tar, as his memory reads as follows: with the tar throbbing in my belly, I see her completely. Each movement creates a swarm of copies. They ripple out from her, following their own whims. Some collide and join together, while others split apart, forming new copies. A reflection spreading out from her, the nexus yet also indistinguishable. So Genessa ascends to a new form of being, and in New Game Plus, after we have ascended and started a new cycle, she acknowledges that she is an immortal like us. But given so many consume tar in large quantities, why is it that Genessa is blessed with such a powerful ascension and no one else is? Well, it seems as though, despite it seeming like human hands are abusing these cosmic gifts, that everything that happens is part of a plan. No matter how much one consumes, one can only transform and ascend if the divine wills it so. This is a fact that the old prisoner bitterly ruminates on after he has consumed the pure nectar of all three Revered. Despite the fact he has consumed enough to make him a god, he cannot ascend because that is not meant for him, it is meant for us. There is a greater plan at play here, by some nebulous force we won't come into contact with until the second game. But everything plays out as it was meant to, even the bad things that happen. And that includes the rise of these cults, all so the conditions could arise that would allow the foundling to ascend. Likewise, I believe that Genessa was chosen to play an important role in the coming events, an immortal guardian and guide, to help the foundling achieve his goal. Indeed, In the Mortal Shell 2 beta, we do get some dialogue from her that seems to back this idea up, where she implies she had foresight of our arrival, and that she is meant to help prepare you for what is to come. I believe that Genessa is an instrument of the cosmic forces that be, like the Undermother of Mortal Shell 2. Being an immortal who has been transformed by the nectar of their kin, she is able to have a sort of contact with them. Thus, Genessa's role is to guide and protect the Foundling, and now the Harbinger in the second game. I do find it sad that when Genessa becomes this formless immortal, Teal clearly struggled to cope with her loss. He talks of still reaching for her in the middle of a cold night, as if he was used to sleeping next to her and holding her while they slept. Teal also had his role to play. He was to become a mortal shell for the Foundling, an important instrument to be wielded on the path to the Foundling's ultimate ascension. But Teal wouldn't know this. Instead, he would die alone, after losing the one person he found comfort in. Genuinely one of the saddest stories within Mortal Shell. Finally, we come to the third temple, the Crypt of Martyrs, the one established by the ex-priestess of Vatra, now the Ovate who leads the worship of the Immaculate. The Immaculate is certainly the most elegant looking of the Revered, and according to an inscription is the most vulnerable. Where the Temple of Ash was primarily concerned with the mutilation and destruction of one's mortal flesh, the Crypt of Martyrs seems to be about death, about escaping this realm by passing on and being enshrined in the ice of the Immaculate. We can learn a little bit about their ideology and practices from an inscription, which reads as follows: "Kneel before the Immaculate. Place your palm upon the deathless doctrine. Surrender your pride, your vanity, or as you call it, your will. This is the first sin. Let go. Allow her eternal wisdom, untouched and unspoiled, guide you. Your spirit will not falter if it is hers to command." So in essence, the martyr cult is about letting go of life, of your own will, martyring yourself and joining the Immaculate in death. Those who are fortunate enough to go through such transformation will be enshrined in ice, where their spirit will dwell alongside their immaculate God. Those who become enshrined are the blessed martyrs, viewed almost as saints by the devout of the crypt. We can see these enshrined in the ice of the inner sanctum, and it seems as though their spirits do indeed live on in a sense. We have discussed how nectar seems to distort reality, and that beings like Genessa who have been transformed by it are able to defy the normal confines of life and death. I believe the same thing has happened here with the martyrs, that in the ice their spirits live on, a sort of pocket reverie maintained by the Immaculate and the nectar. I believe that we get a glimpse into this icy domain during our fight with Tarsus, after drinking the nectar ourselves. Eredrim, someone who becomes a servant of the Immaculate, shares his perception on what awaits the chosen martyrs beyond the ice. He says, "They say that beyond the ice, the old world is preserved. No war, no famine, no suffering. Eternal peace, shielded by their unwavering sovereignty, a lineage that spans centuries. Why should I not be counted among the privileged?" Indeed, this seems to be the ultimate desire of those who worship the Immaculate, to shed the bonds tying us to this world of suffering, be martyred, and preserved beyond the ice. It seems as though the martyr spirits are preserved using winter glass, ice which preserves the dead and the dying, and the frozen fragments of these martyrs are actually seen as holy relics that are shared among the devout. This is not dissimilar from real-world saints, whose remains are also seen as relics. Tarsus, the boss of this dungeon, is the first martyr, and was the first to be sacrificed and enshrined in this manner, and according to our sister, He has died over and over and over again. He is now the Immaculate's guardian, frail as she is, ready to fight and die for her as many times as is needed. The Enshrined are also a good indicator of how distorted time and space are within Fulgrim, as Sester Genessa says that they have been waiting for thousands of years alongside the Immaculate, so that they can bear witness to her eventual ascension. Thousands of years apparently passed here, and yet clearly some of the bandits from Hadern's original operation are still alive. How is that possible? Well, as we mentioned earlier, nectar is a reality-altering substance, and if the Myriad can break down the spatial order of the Seat of Infinity, then I believe the Immaculate is also able to do the same with her nectar. I believe that the temporal within the enshrined ice of the crypt is distorted. Perhaps time moves at a different speed within this pocket dimension. Perhaps the abuse of nectar in Fulgrim has made time break down in the entire region. Either way, a cult primarily focused on death is of course well suited to living within a tomb, but it doesn't make for the most lively of locations. According to the fast travel description, the upper levels of the crypt lay abandoned. These are where the bodies of the damned lie, purposefully offered up to scavengers. This is why these upper halls are populated by the Noctiserper, who feast on the flesh of those buried here. The true martyrs lie enshrined in the icy sanctum that lies deeper still, guarded by a Grisha beast who has been enslaved, essentially acting as a guard dog for any trespassers who would defile the Immaculate's rest. With that said, this is probably a good moment to discuss Eredrim, my personal favourite shell, as he is a good window into the culture and practices of the martyr cult. Eredrim is a warrior of what he calls a venerable order, and I see this as a sort of order of knights, like the real-world Crusader Knights. Indeed, the eagle on his pauldron is very similar to the symbol of the real-world Teutonic Order. It is likely here that he received his armour, given this set is very different from anything we see in possession of the martyrs. It seems as though Eredrim dreamed of redemption. He lamented the role he and his order had played in slaughtering innocents, all for the territorial gain of the kingdom they are from. But he heard word of the martyr cult in Fulgrim that sounded like an answer to his prayers, and his best chance for redemption. His memory reads as follows: The Ovate made promises of an end to war and human suffering. Promises all were desperate to hear, myself no least, for I'd seen my share of tragedy. I scratched my name in their book, swearing myself to the deathless doctrine. My armour clattered on the ice as I knelt before them and asked myself if I would ever be worthy. Like most within this cult, Eredrim wanted to be judged worthy to join the ranks of the martyrs, so that he might find the peace that he so desired. However, in order to do so, Eredrim would unfortunately find himself once again being used as a blunt and violent instrument. Of course, the central premise of their cult was that you had to be martyred in order to join the Immaculate, and it seems as though Eredrim played the role of the executioner. The relevant memory reads as follows: The impoverished souls waited for judgment. Their heads were bowed, lips moving as they recited the martyr's hymn. My blade fell upon the first neck, but bone and sinew held fast. By the second blow, the remaining devout fled into the dark. But it seems that no matter how dutifully he performed his task, he was still found wanting by the Immaculate, unworthy of the right of the martyr that he so greatly desired. As such, he started taking matters into his own hands and pursuing his own zeal and directives by culling those whom he saw as the infirm or dissenters. His reputation as a grim executioner spread beyond his own cult to that of the others, for if we speak to Brethr Corvid of the Seat of Infinity, while wearing Eredrim's shell, then he knows who we are and what role we play. He also asks that we end his life, as we have done for so many of his Sesters and Brethers. Does this mean he also purged the ranks of the other devout temples, seeing it as his duty to purge the weak from all of the devout? It seems so, and it all seems to have been done because he was so desperate to earn the right of the martyrs, so he might finally know peace. However, his actions caught up with him, and he was arrested by the wardens of his cult and brought before the Immaculate for judgment. Despite the obvious grave situation, Eredrim does find some peace, as he is just happy to be in the Immaculate's presence. Shortly after, it seems as though he met his end, and his description of what he experiences is unusual, saying that his vision blurred and the world went white from his perspective before being attacked and wounded. This confusion that Eredrim felt and the whiteness he saw is likely tied to the unique execution methods used by the Martyrs cult. We learn a little of this from the Radiant Winterglass item, and through its item description we learn that this cult has pretty inventive methods of executing sinners, often using poison and then freezing their victims so that they may suffer for eternity. In Eredrim's case, I would suggest he was poisoned, robbing him of his sight and his senses, and he was stabbed before stumbling his way to his death outside the Temple of Infinity, where we find and claim his shell. Eredrim and Teal both seem to have come from outside Fulgrim, drawn here by the reputation and promise of the cults here that had clearly spread beyond its borders and into the outside world. No better is that illustrated than through the story of our final shell, Harros, who is a vassal knight of an outside kingdom. We learn that at some stage he found himself on the wrong side of the law, and was left with a choice: the executioner's axe or service to the queen. He chose the latter and thus became Harros, the vassal knight. It seems that eventually he and his fellows were given orders to enter Fulgrim and slay the devout and their false gods, an order that Harros took pride in because he saw these devout as lesser, and I believe that in the outside world, other kingdoms must have seen the devout as fanatics, worshippers of false gods. I'll summarise how his story plays out over several memories for brevity. He and his warriors arrive in Fulgrim, and they meet the bandits, who he intimidates and bribes to show him the way to one of the temples. The one he arrives at is described as being a labyrinth, and thus is surely the Temple of Ash that was designed to be one. Indeed, inside the temple we see remnants of what could have been a battle. The bodies of soldiers that are not of the cult are strewn throughout the temple's halls. A madman led him through the labyrinth, someone who knew Harris's name and told him that he forgave him for the crime he would soon commit. Indeed, Harros slew this man, freaked out by the knowledge he had of his name, assuming he was a spy. Many have taken this madman to be Solomon, mainly because Solomon was someone who was aware of his own death, and also forgave his assailant for his own murder. It is very compelling, but it doesn't work in terms of the timeline, because Solomon will later study the twin sister, whom Harros is yet to help birth by the time he kills the madman. It is possible that the breakdown of time and reality in Fulgrim makes this contradiction possible, or perhaps it has something to do with the twice-born element of Solomon's story. Either way, Harros proceeds into the temple and comes face to face with the Revered, and he is awestruck by what he witnesses here. His memory reads as follows: "First I heard the squeals as if from 100 mouths. Then I saw her, the Revered, a writhing mass of sinew, as if all at once she was splitting apart and coalescing. Is it salvation to look upon her? Deliverance? I knelt, losing my strength. I wanted to look away, and yet she was all I wanted to see. It seems as though as Harros enters the chamber of the Revered, she is in the process of giving birth. She is splitting apart, coalescing. Then, in the next memories he describes as it bursts open, spraying the followers in viscera as a newborn crawls out. Harros could not do what he originally came here to do. He could not slay mother and baby. He says, "We had vowed to slay this false god, yet this promise was no more than a coerced pledge. What difference does it make which master we serve? We will serve all the same." The wording here suggests that Harros not only decided not to carry out his orders, but that he would actually serve the Revered. He has once again become a vassal, but to a new master. Indeed, I have seen some suggest that Harros's eventual death at the hands of bandits happens immediately after he leaves the temple, but that cannot be true, as Harros clearly develops for a time during his stay in Fulgrim. We know he eventually brings the twins to Hadern, meaning he has to have known of Hadern and developed some kind of relationship with him. Additionally, he is known to Breather Corvid, even trusted by him, and if he is the one who wielded the molten spear that was used to help birth the twins, then that means he was here long enough to learn the ritual practices of Vatra and obtain this specialized implement. In short, I believe that Harros became a well-known member of the Devout, someone who was capable and trusted. As the twin sister notes, he would then eventually be involved in their birth, wielding the molten spike to free them of their mother, before bringing them to Hadern. He would then be jumped by bandits, before crawling into a cave and succumbing to his wounds. We know that these bandits included Baghead and his friend, because Baghead will admit to as such should we speak to him while wearing the Harros shell. But yes, ultimately Harros the Vassal Knight ended up being killed by an ambush of bandits before crawling into a cave to die. As he is dying, he is approached by a priest, who tells Harros he will be reborn in the light of the Revered, as if he has foreseen that the Vassal Knight will indeed be reborn as the Foundling's first mortal shell. Before we discuss the Foundling and his twin sister, I want to address the manner in which we meet her in-game. The twin sister was added in the DLC, the Virtuous Cycle, and upon installing it, what appears to be a stone carving appears in the tower. However, she is not active in this world, and upon interacting with her, we are drawn into the Reverie, an alternate version of Fulgrim. I would suggest that this is a pocket dimension, given it is named the same as the astral plane that we train in with Hadern. This DLC Fulgrim is also meant to test us, with us having to overcome several repeated trials to find the old seeds of infinity that Hadern once discarded. The prisoner is also not here, again suggesting that this is not the real Fulgrim, but nonetheless our sister is alive and well here, though it seems we once lived together in the real Fulgrim under the stewardship of Hadern and Solomon. Thus our sister is a great source of information about our origins, and of the early days of Solomon and Hadern's operation. These two unborn siblings are brought to Hadern at Fulgrim Tower, where they became part of the coterie of Unborn under Hadern and Solomon's care. Through the dialogues of the twin sister, we learn that these two were of great interest to both Solomon and Hadern. Solomon would develop a close bond with our sister, whereas Hadern would become like a father figure to the Foundling. Indeed, Hadern notes how close Solomon was to the twin sister, and how his influence was having an effect on her. His memory reads as follows: "It is, as I feared, Solomon is lost. His eyes keep straying to her, the malformed one. He gazes upon her with the madness of hope. I can already see his effect on her. These creatures are in their own fashion helpless. Our instincts, our memories, even our very forms, become theirs in time." The twins become the last hope for both Hadern and Solomon. The foundling is Hadern's last hope for an uncorrupted Unborn, and the twin sister is Solomon's last hope at achieving true ascension. It is why these two are treated so personally by both Hadern and Solomon, almost as their children in a way. The twin sister notes that she was damaged from their violent birth, and that it was Solomon who specifically healed her back to health. As Hadern notes, Solomon grew close with her and saw her as his last hope. We can understand what he wanted to achieve with her via some of the sister's recollections regarding Solomon. She says the following: Solomon said there's something in us that initiates our metamorphosis, but more than anything I think he wanted to be like us, to transform himself, his brother, humanity. He spoke of kindred evolution, said that I was the lock and the key. As we discussed earlier, re the sacred gland and nectar, it is a medium for transformation. Thus Solomon now has a new, unspoiled Unborn before him, and thus a new chance to understand its power. Yet there are some more tender moments that show that Solomon truly grew to care for the sister. Reading to her some of the tablets likely from these shifting archives, and his scientific nature rubbed off on her. One of her memories of him reads as follows: "What did Solomon see in me, in us? He was at times tender. Often he'd read from these tablets. I can still hear them falling with a heavy thud. I didn't always understand what he said, but I always listened. Near the end of the virtuous cycle DLC, she notes how Hadern's close relationship with the foundling is why the foundling has become like Hadern. It is why we are so human. Likewise, I believe Solomon imprinted upon our sister, and it is why she is so curious and inquisitive. Indeed, one day she actually asked Solomon to study her, and he was shocked by her request, and he was disquieted that she had got such an idea from him.
I should tell you, I once asked Solomon to study me, to break me apart, like this seed, and find the sacred organ inside. He refused. Then he said something strange. He asked where I had gotten such an idea. From you, of course, I replied, and he grew very quiet.
It's clear that Solomon cared for her, and wouldn't dream of harming her in that way. Hadern called the foundling the Dreamer, because he began to meet the foundling in his dreams. His memory reads as follows: I first glimpsed him in a nightmare. Beneath our feet a dark shape swam, yet we did not sink. Our swords crossed, but I had a sense that this had all happened before, and would happen again. It seems as though the foundling made a connection early on with Hadern, who he would commune with in his dreams. Our sister explains this situation as she says the following: I always thought that you were Hadern's favourite. He was always checking on you as you slumbered endlessly. You were an easy child, so to speak. But even as you drifted through dreams, you must have thought of him, heard him praying, dreamt of him. Maybe he dreamt of you too? So the foundling was easy to look after, essentially just sleeping and dreaming the whole time, and yet connecting with Hadern as he slept, and they would spar together. As Hadern notes, the literal physical form an Unborn takes is drawn upon the people who imprint on them, and the other Unborn are a confusing mismatch of different extreme ideas, which is why they were warped into the fleshy abominations that they are. However, the foundling was asleep to the world, and he only had contact with one man, Hadern, a warrior who didn't infect him with zealous beliefs. Our sister comments on the fact that it is the connection to Hadern that had such a profound influence on who the foundling would eventually become. She says the following: I don't know how, but I think part of Hadern is in you. Why else are you so human, so alike him? Indeed, it seems prior to our awakening, our physical appearance was much different, as Hadern describes us as a scaled seedling. I would imagine we were just a seedling for a while, as when we do finally awake from our dream at the beginning of the game, there seems to be a shattered egg around us. It appears that all this time we were just a defenseless egg, slumbering, while our new humanoid body was being formed deep inside. This is why our sister sought to protect us after Hadern fled, because at that time we weren't the combat-ready humanoid that we are now. However, it was the dream connection that would eventually freak Hadern out so much that he would finally flee Fulgrim and the twins. This pivotal memory reads as follows. I saw him again, the dreamer, he found me in the murky shallows, but this time it was different. He tore open my skin, wore my flesh like a suit of mail. When I awoke, he slept, as he always did, beneath his sister, but I could feel something inside me changed. I can't explain it, but I must leave. Our twin sister also remembers the day that Hadern left, that she heard a ruckus, and moved to protect us. Solomon pleaded with Hadern to leave the other seedlings, but he took them, and this would be the moment that he would discard and destroy the 7 other seedlings that still remained. The twin sister and the foundling were left behind, and Solomon lamented over Hadern's choice to destroy the other seeds. However, it seems that Hadern eventually saw the foundling Unborn as his final hope, a final untainted remnant of the divine that he could help prepare. A memory of his reads as follows. The divine is not ours to extract and consume. I tried to warn the others, but their bodies and minds had already been twisted by this blasphemous act. Even the revered reflect their madness, their hate. They are lost. They drink deeply and forget their names, their purpose, replacing their beliefs with falsehoods. There's only you, Unborn. Prepare, for I shall test you. Hadern lamented all that transpired. The rise of the revered and the devout, the extraction of nectar and tar, a process that warped all who partook in it. Yet in his care he had one last hope, the Unborn who would become known as the Foundling, a pure vessel of the divine, untainted by worship, shielded by outside influence by its endless slumber. Thus he resolved to prepare the dreamer for the role they would play. He took advantage of the dreams in which they connected. He sparred with them in this reverie and trained them how to use all sorts of weapons and how to utilize their innate hardening ability. Hadern is essentially our father, and he prepared us for the challenges that lay ahead in Fulgrim, and would eventually submit to being our mortal shell as well, having done all he could and taking his final rest. Indeed, we do bring Hadern's vision to light, as the Foundling will eventually purge the corrupted Unborn, their cults, and finally the Dark Father himself, before ascending as a pure being that would act as a beacon for the Undermether. In time, a heretic would arise, the being we now know as the Prisoner, someone we know was actually Solomon's brother. He even directly confirms this, should we speak to him while in the Solomon shell, in which he gets a momentary shock, as Solomon should be dead.
You should be dead. Solomon. No, it can't be. I see it's only his face and his form stretched across your frame. Of course, your silence gives it away. He always had too much to say, babbling on and on, incessantly. His words wound into such impossible, staggering formations, often contradicting himself, beautifully. I do miss him. Unfortunately, my dear brother spent too much time beneath those infinite columns.
Solomon also speaks of his brother in his own memories, such as this one. Vision is a burden, my dear brother. I do not blame you for leaving this empire of sycophants and charlatans behind. I fear our knowledge is only a privilege afforded by our silence. Each discovery only provides our masters with more chains. We get no specifics here as to what the brother left behind, but I assume it to be the Temple of Infinity, and the devout in general. In one of our dialogues with him, we learn that he thinks the devout are fools. Fools who are squandering the true potential of the revered. Why should we worship the false gods, and drink upon what little nectar we are able to extract, when we could harvest the sacred glands themselves and ascend to true godhood? Solomon, as we have discussed, was an expert on nectar, its transformative qualities, and the sacred gland, so his brother was likely acutely aware of the glands and their properties. Indeed, some of the dialogues from the twin sister tell us that Solomon actively wanted he and his brother to ascend. It seems as though, for a time, the brothers saw each other as scholars with whom they could discuss these theoreticals, and this is told to us by a certain etching which reads, "And what of my kin? Are you reading this, dear brother? Do you still remember how we played on scholarship? Simpler times, when our quandaries were mere dramatics dressed up as theory. The ideas of ascension clearly became an obsession of his, and thus he began to find a way so that he might truly ascend, and in so doing would turn away from the devout and become a heretic in their eyes." Sester Genessa says that she remembers a heretic, a man who took that which wasn't his, sacred nectar, and gulped it down and was transformed following this act.
I remember a heretic who drank deeply. He took what wasn't his and gulped it down greedily. He was unrecognizable afterward, another man entirely. This was his reward and his penance.
So clearly Genessa is speaking of the prisoner here, someone who was once present at the Temple of Infinity, but was declared a heretic for consuming that which wasn't his, the divine nectar. But where did he get such a rare product, if he didn't harvest these sacred glands himself? Well, as we have discussed a couple of times, his brother Solomon is an expert in nectar and sacred glands. According to the prisoner, it was Solomon who was able to procure this lethal brew, by somehow extracting pure nectar from tar.
He promised to turn tar into true nectar, and he succeeded. I witnessed the world burst from the fires of heaven. I watched as it decayed into this wretched place. Such a gift. But when the vision ended, he stared at me with revulsion.
So the prisoner consumed the pure nectar distilled by his brother, and what he witnessed was breathtaking. He claims he witnessed the birth of the universe, but he was physically transformed by the nectar, and thus when he awoke from these visions, he saw that his brother was looking at him in revulsion. The Dark Father was then branded a heretic for daring to reach the same heights as the Revered, and was imprisoned in Falgrim Tower. We learned that the Dark Father would eventually inspire followers, others who believed that the devout were fools, and that the only truth of this world was personal power. An etching regarding the Dark Father's influence on people reads as follows: "We have followed in his steps, the Dark One, retraced his winding, inscrutable logic, listened for the whispers he must have heard. They've moved into temples, tall walled monuments erected by devoted hands. They pray to truths we know to be false. We've resisted the whispers, rendered them inert. Let any who read this deny their gifts, for the promise of a life of ecstasy is a fallacy. Life is suffering, obligation, and truth. Seek us out, and we will reveal this to you." This very much lines up with the beliefs of the prisoner, who these followers call the Dark One. They basically echo his sentiment that these gods are false, and that the truths they offer are false. We find another etching that appears to repeat these same ideas, and thus is likely from someone with similar beliefs. It reads as follows: "They seek to fill the drought of meaning in this world with prayers and proclamations. Nothing could be further from the truth. So we shall bring wreckage to their pathetic rites and rituals, their pitiful routines. Seek us beneath the grand obelisks, and find there is no one true purpose, to each their own. The person we can find beneath the obelisk is the corrupted Sester, someone who shares the same mask as Genessa, but it is red. As I visually hinted at earlier, there is the possibility that this corrupted Sester is the twice-born dark half of Genessa, or perhaps is one of her many aspects, or copies, that resulted from her transformation into what she is now. Consider that no other Sesters within the temple wear the same mask as those of Genessa. It is only these two who do so. Either way, whether she is Genessa's other half or just another Sester, she was clearly once part of the Seat of Infinity. Yet going by her message, she clearly has gone rogue, and she very much sells heretical goods. The one that stands out the most is Forbidden Offering, an item which references a forbidden rite. It reads as follows: "A perverse offering for the tarnished seals. The rite of transfiguration remains forbidden, but its practice is not completely forgotten. The promise of revelation carried a high price for those who glimpsed the unknowable. Such followers became forsaken creatures, fit only to be locked away." On the Fextra Life wiki page for this Sester, it mentions a dialogue by the old prisoner, where he would comment on why she is considered corrupted. He would claim that she tried to undertake the rite of transfiguration but failed. That is why she has been corrupted and outcast. However, I could not for the life of me get this dialogue to trigger, no matter what order I did things in, nor could I even find any footage of it on YouTube. However, I do believe this is likely the correct story, given she sells this item. Fextra Life often uses text dump files of games when writing their wiki, so perhaps it is a cut dialogue. Either way, it seems as though this corrupted Sester also followed in the footsteps of the Dark Father, rejecting the teachings of the Revered and trying to seize power and transfiguration for herself. Solomon foresaw what his brother would become, seemingly glimpsing into the future during his twice-born ritual in the Seat of Infinity, a period in which he saw all threads of his life past and future. He says the following: "I stood before you, dear brother, watching in horror as your lips parted for that poisoned chalice. I followed a path once tread by those who would become Sesters and Breathers, watching the past and present converge. You did not know I was there. I looked on from another place, waiting to be born." So this recounts the event in which Solomon's brother would drink the nectar that would transform him into the giant being he is now. But what I like about Solomon is that he sees what happens as part of a plan, that even his brother's monstrous behaviours are something that was intended. The relevant memory that relays this sentiment reads as follows: "Fate is not ours to defy, only to fulfill. You're chosen as am I, brother, as is the unborn, ordained by the infinite. Perhaps you'll understand one day. In death, I shall find a new purpose, and your purpose, twisted and malevolent as you are, will light the way." I absolutely love this passage. It is dripping with meaning and tells us so much of who Solomon was as a man. He wasn't a religious man like Hadern, but he did believe in something: the infinite. After touching the threads of infinity at eternal Narthex, he understood that all life is connected in a thread that is preordained, and we all have a role to play. He took comfort in this, as he had seen how it all played out. He foresaw his death, but took comfort that in death, he would become a shell for the Unborn, to help him achieve his mission. He saw the monstrous transformation of his brother, and yet he took comfort in the fact that his brother would not succeed, and that his terrible acts were all part of the plan. The Unchained was a necessary evil, for in him the nectar of 3 Revered would be contained and distilled. The Unborn would then claim this gland, ending the Unchained's evil plan and ascending himself. That is the Unchained's role, a stepping stone for the Foundling to ascend. This is something the Unchained himself realizes at the end of the game, when he bitterly ruminates on his fate and decides to try and kill us out of spite. Solomon was right, Hadern was right. For not only do we ascend, completing the vision of our father figure Hadern, but our sister does also. In the Virtuous Cycle DLC, we gather the seedlings that Hadern stole and discarded when he left the Fulgrim Conclave. They are dead and petrified. However, our sister still believes that there is a use for them. Solomon apparently believed that they could be used to restore our sister, and perhaps even allow her to ascend. After collecting all 7 of them, Solomon is once again proven to be correct, as our sister is able to get some of the true nectar from their remnants and ascend. Her ascension is incredible. She physically vanishes from the stone slab, and yet she still speaks to us. She claims that she is everywhere, and I imagine her immortality is similar to that of Genessa's. That is envisaged by the disciples of the Seat of Infinity, where a being is present everywhere at once and all the time. As for our ascension, we become immortal, and in New Game Plus, Genessa tells us that repeating our task over and over again is our immortality, something she herself is familiar with. Again, I believe that our ascension means that we become timeless, a being that is present everywhere and at every time. We have fulfilled our destiny, and it wouldn't have been possible without Hadern, Solomon, and even the Unchained. Returning to the Unchained, let us discuss the theory I have regarding his identity. As I alluded to earlier, I believe that this being is actually the twice-born copy of Solomon himself, a doppelganger of Solomon, born of him when he himself underwent the rite of twice-born. Why do I believe this? Well, firstly, I once again reference the tenets of the Seat of Infinity, where one is expected to throw themselves into the chasm found there, where you will undergo your twice-born and become a child of the Myriad. We know that Solomon himself did this, as in one of his memories, he says that he once followed the same path of the Sesters and Brethers. This means that he will have been twice born, that a shadow of him would have been born. But why do I think the prisoner is Solomon's shadow? Well, firstly, they are 2 sides of the same coin. They both study the Unborn, and they are both absorbed with understanding ascension. Solomon, however, wouldn't cross the line of killing the Unborn for his ends, such as we see in his refusal to kill the twin sister. The Unchained is what Solomon would be, had he decided to cross that line. He is the dark version of Solomon. He is the version of Solomon who not only coveted knowledge but power. However, there is more direct evidence to support this theory. Firstly, there is the case of an intruder in the DLC our sister keeps mentioning.
While you were out, I found myself listening. I heard footfalls in the tower and felt boots falling upon the cobblestone. If only I had your eyes. The visitor, they tried to be secretive, but I could smell them. They were both familiar and strange.
As we go on our expeditions, she keeps saying that someone broke in, a brazen thief who is rifling around. Now she cannot see, but she says something interesting about their scent. that they were familiar yet also strange, as if it is someone she knows, but they are different. As I mentioned earlier, the instance of the tower found in the DLC is different from the main game. Most notably, the prisoner is absent. I would suggest that this pocket instance is based upon the tower from an earlier time, a time before the prisoner was transformed and imprisoned. Thus he would be a regular human, a human who is capable of being the intruder she mentions. Someone familiar, but different, because he is related to Solomon, who she knows very well. There's more, because she tells us that the next time this person breaks in, they call her a maggot.
Don't worry, they're not back. Or rather, I should say, he's not back. It's just, I remember more now. He called me maggot and fled. His voice. I didn't want to think of it. It reminded me of Solomon's.
So again, the voice reminds her of Solomon's, meaning it is almost certainly his brother. But the fact that the voice is so similar that it confuses our sister leads me to believe that it is more than brotherhood. I think it is because the prisoner is Solomon, or at least his twice-born copy. This is why a blind being like our sister is confusing the two. I think this is what the developers are hinting at, because the sister has been setting up this reveal through her other lore dumps, especially focusing on Solomon's twice-born ritual. Finally, and the strongest piece of evidence for me, is when we turn in the final seed of infinity to her. She comments on the sacred nectar's presence and says,
There's something left, a remnant of nectar. True nectar. What did Solomon once call it? A fragile vessel for the divine. Yes, that's it.
You found it. The sacred gland. I knew you would. Careful now. It's a fragile vessel for the divine.
This is the exact same terminology used by the old prisoner, and again I believe that the intent behind the whole intruder side story is to push the idea that the prisoner is the dark twin of Solomon. Now you are free to disregard this and believe that they are just natural brothers who use similar terminology because they were close and debated these ideas together. But I personally feel it is the intention of the developers to subtly hint that the Dark Father is Solomon's twice-born copy. I also think that it makes his character far more interesting and a very fitting villain to the story at large. Whatever his identity, his purpose was to ingest the divine nectar of all three sacred glands, so that we ourselves could claim his burgeoning gland and ascend. The story of Mortal Shell concludes in victory. Our twin sister ascends via the use of nectar found in the Seeds of Infinity. We ourselves purge Fulgrim of corruption, slaying all three of the corrupt Revered and putting an end to the evil Dark Father. We then ascend and act as a beacon for our kin, and so ends the epic story of Mortal Shell, and now begins the story of Mortal Shell 2 and the Harbinger. The introduction to Mortal Shell 2 directly references the Foundling's victory over the Unchained, and their subsequent ascension. We are told that after this, he acted as a beacon which drew his cosmic kin here, the Undermether, who crashed in Fulgrim, causing a new religion to rise in her name. So the Foundling's journey is essentially the prelude to the second game, and having watched this video, I hope that you feel better prepared to understand how the two games connect. We don't know much more about the Undermether, aside from the fact that she is again a cosmic being, and one who is able to manifest a similar astral plane to the Reverie of the first. Clearly this being and the new player character, the Harbinger, will be related to the Foundling and the Unborn in some way, but we won't know how until we play the sequel. Of course the ova, the eggs of the Undermether we are tasked with collecting, are very much like the seedlings of the first game. We also know that Tar is still important in the second game, as we fight two bosses that seem to be related to it, the Tar Golem and the Tar Addled Shepherd, the latter of which once again highlights its corrupting nature and influence. Genessa is also here again to once again play the role of mentor and guide for the Harbinger, as she once did for the Foundling before him. And of course some of the mortal shells from the first game are returning, showing they survived after the first game. Eredrim, Teal and Harros are all in the game, which is why I wanted to explore their lore in some detail. And what is more interesting is that the memory mechanic in the second game is more involved. I had to do a lot of reading between the lines in the first game. However, in the second game it seems like we get to visually view these old memories. From what we have seen of Teal's memories, it very much is lining up with what we see in the first game. We already see his initiation into the Temple of Ash, and him meeting the Oblate. So again, I thought it important to dive into the cults of the first game, because clearly the sequel will be acknowledging and referencing them. I even found an Iron Maiden in the beta, one of the exact same designs as those found in the Temple of Ash in the first game. Given the second game also seems to take place in Fulgrim, it is very likely that we could visit the ruins of the cult temples from the first game. But I think I will leave the video there, and leave the Mortal Shell to speculation for the game's imminent release. If you are watching this video after the release of the second game, then bear in mind I did write this prior to launch, and only using the limited information found in the beta. If some things now turn out to be outdated or disproven by the second game, then you know why. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore of the first game, a game which I really loved on release but didn't really revisit until recently. The game may appear short and have only surface level lore, but I think the length of this video definitely suggests that there is more beneath the surface, and I am really excited to see how the sequel expands the lore further. I would also like to take this chance to implore you to play the first game yourself prior to playing the second game if you have the time to do so. I recently 100%'d the game, and I had an absolute blast doing so. This involved completing the game as a one-hit Foundling, as well as completing the roguelike DLC, and its Obsidian Shell challenge mode as well. I don't often feel the need to grind out all achievements for most games, but I really enjoyed my time with the first game, and so felt compelled to do so. I also really like procedural content in Souls-like games, which is why I'm a big fan of Chalice Dungeons and Night Rain. And so the DLC roguelike mode really scratched an itch for me. Even then, if you just wanted to play the main story, then it is relatively short, very much beatable in 9 hours or so. It does have its jank and bugs, and is dated to some degree, but I think it very much is a worthwhile experience. But with all that said, let me know your thoughts below. Are you a fan of the story that is set up in the first game? Where do you expect the story to go next? But until next time folks, I will see you in the Tower of Fulgrim. Take care and have a wonderful evening.